Donald Trump just got humiliated on the world stage, not by an enemy, not by a rival superpower, not by someone who spent months threatening him back. He got humiliated by Canada, the country he mocked, the country he slapped with tariffs, the country he called the 51st state, the country he publicly laughed at. That same Canada just walked into the heart of Europe, sat down with some of the most powerful leaders on the planet, and was treated not like America's quiet northern neighbor, but like a serious, independent, global force. And the worst part for Trump? He has nobody to blame but himself. Because every threat he made, every insult he threw, every tariff he signed, pushed Canada one step further toward this moment. And now that moment has arrived. And it may have just changed everything. Nobody in Washington saw this coming. And that might be the most important part of this entire story. Because when Donald Trump began turning up the pressure on Canada, the expectation inside his circle was straightforward. Canada would feel the pain. Canada would feel the economic squeeze. And eventually, Canada would come back to the table asking for mercy. That is how the pressure playbook is supposed to work. You apply force, you create discomfort, and sooner or later the other side blinks. But Mark Carney did not blink. He boarded a plane and flew to Europe. And what happened when he got there shook the foundations of everything Trump thought he understood about power, loyalty, and the future of Western alliances. Because this was not a casual diplomatic visit. This was not the kind of trip where a leader shows up, shakes a few hands, takes some photographs, and flies home with nothing but good memories. No. What Carney walked into was something far more significant. He was welcomed not as a visitor, not as a guest, not as the representative of America's quieter, politer neighbor. He was welcomed as a partner, a serious one. The kind of partner Europe has been quietly searching for as uncertainty from Washington continues growing louder by the day. And the contrast could not have been more striking. While Trump was back home talking about America first, Carney was sitting across from European leaders who were openly, publicly, and enthusiastically signaling that Canada belongs in their inner circle. That signal alone was worth more than 1,000 press releases. Think about what that image communicates to the rest of the world. Europe, the democratic heartland that America helped rebuild after World War II, the alliance system that Washington spent decades nurturing and leading, was now turning toward Canada with open arms, while questions about American reliability continue piling up. That is not a small symbolic moment. That is a geopolitical earthquake happening in slow motion. And Trump felt it. Even if he has not said it out loud, you better believe the people around him felt it too. Because this was not just Canada scoring a diplomatic point. This was Canada beginning to occupy a space in the global conversation that America, under Trump's leadership, appears to be vacating. And here is what makes Mark Carney such a uniquely dangerous opponent for Trump in this moment. Carney does not fight the way Trump fights. He does not reach for insults. He does not chase headlines. He does not build his strategy around making the other side look weak through public humiliation. Instead, Carney operates in a completely different register. He is calm where Trump is chaotic. He is precise where Trump is unpredictable. He is patient where Trump demands immediate results. And in the world of high-stakes international diplomacy, those qualities do not make you weak. They make you extraordinarily effective. Because while Trump is busy dominating news cycles with noise, Carney is quietly building something real, something structural, something that does not disappear when the cameras turn off. What he built in Europe is the clearest proof of that yet. Because the meetings Carney held were not vague conversations about shared values and hopeful futures. They were substantive. They covered trade. They covered economic cooperation. They covered security. They covered the kind of long-term strategic partnership that countries only discuss when they are genuinely serious about changing the shape of their relationship. And Europe was serious, deadly serious, because Europe right now is operating in survival mode. The war in Ukraine permanently changed how European leaders think about security. Energy dependence created vulnerabilities nobody fully anticipated. Questions about whether America will remain a reliable NATO partner under Trump have introduced a level of anxiety into European capitals that did not exist just a few years ago. And anxious powers look for stable partners. They look for predictable allies. They look for leaders who speak the language of institutions, rules, long-term planning, and shared democratic commitment. Mark Carney speaks that language fluently, and Europe noticed. So when Carney arrived and began laying out Canada's vision, something clicked. Because Canada under Carney is not just offering friendship. Canada is offering something more valuable in uncertain times. Canada is offering dependability. And in a world where Washington has started to feel increasingly unpredictable, dependability is perhaps the most precious commodity in international politics right now. European leaders who once would have assumed America would always anchor the Western alliance are now quietly, carefully, deliberately building redundancies, backup plans, alternative frameworks, and Canada, with Carney leading the way, is inserting itself directly into the center of those plans. That is an extraordinary development, and it is happening at breathtaking speed. But the story gets even more uncomfortable for Trump when you look at the specific areas where Canada and Europe began deepening their cooperation. Because this was not limited to trade statistics and economic agreements, as significant as those are. The conversations expanded into defense, into security cooperation, into the kind of military and strategic coordination that goes far beyond what a typical diplomatic visit produces. And that matters enormously, because one of Trump's core arguments has always been that European allies do not pull their weight, that they depend too heavily on American military power, that America carries a burden others refuse to share. Fine. But what happens when those same European countries start building stronger security frameworks with Canada instead? What happens when defense conversations that used to run exclusively through Washington start including Ottawa? Suddenly the leverage shifts, and leverage is everything in Trump's political world. Consider the position this puts Trump in. He spent months using economic pressure to try to bring Canada to heel. He imposed tariffs designed to hurt. He used language designed to humiliate. He floated ideas about absorbing Canada entirely, language so aggressive it would have been unthinkable coming from any previous American president. And the result of all that pressure, Canada did not collapse inward. Canada did not retreat. Canada did not come crawling back to Washington with hat in hand. Instead, Canada went and built stronger relationships with some of the most powerful democratic nations on Earth. The pressure did not break Canada. It launched Canada onto a bigger stage, and now Trump is watching from the sidelines as the country he thought he could bully quietly becomes one of the most strategically important players in the democratic world. That is not just a political embarrassment. That is a strategic failure of enormous proportions. And the worst part, the part that must be absolutely maddening for Trump and everyone around him, is that Carney did it without ever raising his voice, without ever stooping to personal attacks, without ever getting dragged into the kind of ugly public brawl that Trump thrives in. Carney simply went to Europe, sat down with serious people, had serious conversations, and walked away with serious commitments. Clean, precise, effective, and now the entire world is watching what comes next. Because what started as a trade dispute between neighbors has turned into something far larger, something that touches the future of Western alliances, the balance of global power, and the question of who gets to sit at the center of the democratic world's most important conversations. But what happened in those final closed-door sessions in Europe? What was said when the cameras were gone and the formal meetings ended may be the part of this story that truly keeps Trump up at night. Because the commitments made behind those closed doors did not just strengthen Canada's position, they may have permanently changed it. And if what insiders are beginning to reveal turns out to be true, Trump's worst nightmare may have only just begun. The doors closed, the cameras disappeared, the formal speeches ended. And that is exactly when the most important conversations began. Because anyone who has spent time around serious international diplomacy knows a fundamental truth. The real deals, the real commitments, the real decisions that reshape the world are never made in front of the lights. They happen in the quiet rooms, the small meetings after the big meetings, the private conversations that never make it into official readouts. And what happened in those quiet rooms during Carney's time in Europe has started leaking out in ways that should make everyone in Washington deeply uncomfortable. Because the picture emerging from those closed-door sessions is not just about trade numbers or defense budgets or diplomatic pleasantries. It is about something much bigger. It is about the architecture of a new world order. And Canada, remarkably, appears to be one of its principal architects. Let that sink in for a moment. Canada. The country Trump reduced to a punchline. The country he described as a burden, a freeloader, a subordinate that should be grateful for American generosity. That same Canada is now sitting in rooms with European powerhouses and helping to design the future of Western democratic cooperation, not as a junior partner asking for permission, not as a quiet observer taking notes in the corner, but as a central voice whose perspective is being actively sought, carefully listened to, and genuinely respected. The transformation in how the world sees Canada under Carney's leadership has been so rapid, so dramatic, so complete, that it almost defies belief. Almost. Because when you understand what Carney brought into those rooms, it starts making perfect sense. What Carney carried into every meeting was not just Canadian charm or political goodwill. He carried something far more powerful. Credibility. The kind of credibility that cannot be manufactured through press releases or political spin. The kind that comes from a career spent navigating some of the most turbulent economic moments in modern history. As the former governor of the Bank of Canada and then the Bank of England, Carney helped steer two major economies through the wreckage of the 2008 financial crisis. He sat at the table during moments when the global financial system was genuinely trembling. He made decisions under pressure that most politicians would not have the technical knowledge or the steady nerve to make. And European leaders know this history. They remember it. They respect it deeply. So when Carney walks into a room and begins talking about economic security, trade resilience, and long-term strategic planning, people do not just politely listen. They lean forward, because they know the man speaking has actually done this before, at the highest possible level, and in a moment of profound global uncertainty, that kind of proven credibility is worth more than almost anything else a leader can bring to the table. And Trump has no answer for it. That is the brutal political reality underneath all of this. Because Trump's power has always been built on a very specific kind of dominance: volume, aggression, the willingness to say things others will not say and do things others will not do. That style works in certain environments. It works in campaign rallies. It works in media cycles built around conflict and controversy. It even works in negotiations where the other side genuinely has nowhere else to go. But it does not work against someone like Carney, because Carney does not get rattled by volume. He does not respond to aggression with fear. He responds to it with patience and strategy. And patience, it turns out, is an extraordinarily powerful weapon when your opponent keeps making mistakes driven by ego and impulse. Every aggressive move Trump made gave Carney more justification to deepen ties elsewhere. Every insulting comment gave European leaders more reason to welcome Canada warmly. Every tariff, every threat, every casual dismissal of Canada's sovereignty became another brick in the wall Carney was quietly building between Canada and American dependency. Now. Look at where that wall stands today. Because the agreements coming out of Carney's European visit are not vague promises to do better. They are concrete. They are structural. They are the kind of commitments that take years to fully unwind once they are in place. On trade, Canada and key European partners are moving with serious urgency to deepen economic ties in ways that would have seemed unnecessary just a few years ago, when American markets felt permanent and secure. Supply chains are being reconsidered. Energy partnerships are being restructured. Financial corridors that once ran almost exclusively through American institutions are being quietly rerouted. None of this happens overnight, but the direction is unmistakable, and once economies begin genuinely rewiring themselves away from a single point of dependency, the process tends to accelerate rather than slow down, because every new agreement makes the next agreement easier. Every new partnership creates new stakeholders who benefit from keeping that partnership strong. And every step Canada takes toward deeper European integration is a step away from the kind of vulnerability Trump was counting on to keep Canada compliant. But the trade dimensions, as significant as they are, may actually be the smaller part of the story. Because what appears to have genuinely alarmed people close to Trump is the security conversation, the defense conversation, the quiet but unmistakable signals coming out of Europe suggesting that Canada is being folded into strategic planning discussions at a level that goes far beyond anything a normal bilateral diplomatic visit would produce. Think carefully about what that means. NATO has long operated with America as its undisputed anchor. The assumption that Washington sets the tone, controls the agenda, and ultimately decides the direction of Western collective defense has been baked into the alliance's DNA for decades. But Trump has repeatedly rattled that assumption. His comments about NATO being obsolete, his suggestions that America might not defend allies who do not pay enough, his visible impatience with multilateral commitments have created a genuine crisis of confidence inside the alliance. And into that crisis of confidence, Carney stepped with something Europe desperately needed: reassurance from a stable democratic partner who actually believes in the value of collective security. Someone who does not treat alliances as transactions to be renegotiated based on quarterly payments. Someone who understands that the real value of an alliance is not measured in dollars, but in the trust that accumulates over decades of shared commitment. Canada under Carney offered that, and Europe grabbed it with both hands. The implications of that are staggering when you follow the logic all the way through. Because if Canada becomes genuinely embedded in European security planning, if Ottawa starts playing a meaningful role in conversations about continental defense that used to happen exclusively through Washington, then something fundamental has shifted in the architecture of Western power. America does not lose its military dominance overnight. That is not what this is about. But influence is not the same as military power. Influence is about who gets consulted, who gets included, whose voice shapes the agenda before the formal decisions get made. And if Canada earns a consistent seat in those pre-decision conversations, the map of Western influence starts looking very different from how Trump drew it. Very different indeed. And that redrawn map may represent something Trump never fully prepared for. Not an enemy rising to challenge America, not a rival superpower flexing its muscles, but a friend, a neighbor, a country that shares a border thousands of miles long, quietly and methodically building a future that no longer depends on Washington's approval.